Good morning, this is Bob Pfeuffer, and I am a member of the First United Methodist Church, New Braunfels, Texas. Today is April 22nd, 2014, and we are upstairs in Wesley Hall in the room set aside for the Archives Committee. And I am a member of that committee, and Mrs. Margaret Brazel is our chairman. Good morning, Margaret.
Good morning, Bob.
And good morning, Gail.
Good
How are
morning.
you? And good morning, Amber. Amber Lujan's here running the video for us this morning. And of course, Gail Hester over here is a longtime member, and she is going to prompt me when I forget what I want to talk about. She has promised to do that. Well, we're here to talk about my recollections of this church. And to begin with, I better tell you that I am going to be 77 years of age on May 15th, 2014. And I was born in New Braunfels, Texas, May 15th, 1937, and was raised on the corner of Willow and Lee Street here in New Braunfels, not very far from this church. And in those days, we had a different building here, and we had a different name. And it was called the Karbach Memorial Methodist Church, named after David Karbach and all of the folks that lived out at the Karbach settlement on what is now Farm to Market Road 306 going to Canyon Lake. Well, my folks brought me to Sunday school here. My dad was Tug Summers Pfeuffer, and his wife was Laura Mildred Gode Pfeuffer, G-O-D-E. And I guess we started going to the Methodist Church because of my grandfather, R.J. Gode. He was known as Bob Gode, and I was named for my two grandfathers, Bob Gode and Ulrich Septimus Pfeuffer, U.S. Pfeuffer. Now, I am told that both of those guys used to sing in the choir at the First Protestant Church. And I don't know what years, haven't done any research on it, and I do not know how the Gode family made the migration from the First Protestant Church here to, at that time, Karbach Memorial Methodist Church. My earliest recollection of the old building was that it was sort of built up high off of the ground, and there were steep steps to go up the front, and underneath was about a half basement where the Sunday school rooms were located, especially for the kids. It was dark, it was damp, it was smelly, it smelled like mildew, and it wasn't very fun to be down there. I didn't go to Sunday school very often, but anyway, when my folks insisted that I do, I did that. Along about 1950, it was determined that that building was not safe. Reverend Darrell Gray was the minister here, and we decided, I say we, I was too young to be involved, but my grandfather, Bob Gode, was on the board of trustees. And recently there have been pictures down in the hall of the trustees turning shovels of dirt when they broke ground here. And he was in on that, and as one of the trustees. Well, we had to have some place to have church. What better place than a theater? And the Brontex Theater, just a couple of blocks toward the plaza from this location on West San Antonio Street, was the ideal place. So we conducted services there. The minister was up on the stage. Can't remember whether they actually brought down any of the podiums or anything like that from the church, but probably not, because I believe all the old stuff was built in. Darrell Gray had a son named Lee, who was my age, and he and I were running buddies along with a couple of other fellas, and how we avoided getting thrown in jail for all the things we pulled, I don't know. But he and I were very, very good friends, and through him I knew the Grays, Irene Gray was his mother, and the parsonage at that time was up on, oh, let's see, what is the name of that street? It's right behind the Sophienberg Museum and Archives, across from the old Dittlinger House at that location. And it was on the left-hand side as
Wasn't
you
on
would.
wasn't Academy.
No, Academy's the next one over.
Next one over.
And then I just can't think of the name of that one right now. But anyway, that's where they lived, and I visited in their home and so forth. Darrell Gray had been a cowboy singer and entertainer down somewhere around Corpus Christi in his younger days. And he was tall, good looking. All the women just flocked around him and wouldn't leave him alone because he really was a handsome man, and those of you that have seen him know what I'm talking about. He was our minister, and we conducted services down there at the church. Well, he told me in later years after he retired, happened to go to Kerrville, where he and Irene were living in the Methodist retirement community up there, that when they got ready to take the old building down, the old Carbach building down, that they just got a front end loader and put the bucket all the way up and got on one corner of that building and pushed a little bit, and the whole thing collapsed.
Oh.
He said it was 1,000 wonders that the thing had not fallen on the congregation at some point. It was that bad.
Where was that church located in relation to this current church?
Right here. The Methodist parsonage at one time was next door. Then it was just up Ginther Street on the right-hand side. And there was an old joke that we used to tell about how come we had to sell that parsonage and move it somewhere else. They weren't talking about any particular ministers. The minister was tired of the congregation stopping by after lunch and getting into the preacher's beer and fried chicken. That was just a joke. In any event, we've had numerous different accommodations for our ministers. One of the, backing up a minute, one of the old stories about the Carbach Memorial Church and the David Carbach family out on 306, where Reverend Lowry now has a home. I don't know whether he lives there full time or not, but he had been a minister here just a few years ago, and his mother was a Carbach. And one of the young boys was Bruno Wilhelm Klingemann, whose mother was a Carbach. And B.W. Klingemann was a dentist, and in the early 30s, and actually I guess in the late 20s anyway, and he practiced in Lockhart, Texas, because there were a lot of Carbachs over there. And unfortunately his dental career came to a sudden end when he had a hunting accident and he blew his right thumb off with a 12-gauge shotgun.
Oh, no.
Had to be awful. So without a thumb, a dentist is out of business. So he became a politician. And he moved to New Braunfels. And in my later years, I had the good fortune of being around him every deer hunting season. And that's where I hear some of these stories. Well, he said these preachers would come to the settlement on horseback. I don't know that it was de Vilbus or any of those. He never named anybody. But they had a big meeting hall, and the windows would open on the sides, and you could prop them open and the breeze would come through and so forth, and put them down in the wintertime. And he said invariably this preacher would come on New Year's, and he would preach New Year's Eve. And he would preach, and he would preach, and he would preach, and midnight would come and go, and all the kids wanted to hoot and holler when midnight arrived. And he just kept railing at them. you can imagine the old time hell and brimstone type Methodist preachers. So the boys decided they were going to fix him. And so the next year when he showed up, they had stolen a half a stick of dynamite. And they pulled it up into an oak tree out in front, I don't know how far from the meeting hall. And right at 12 o'clock they set that thing off. And he said it blew all the leaves off of that tree. And people in the congregation came boiling out the doors, through the windows, and emptied the whole place, and that was the end of the preaching. He said when they found out what had happened and who was involved in doing that, he said they really got whipped. They got whooped.
I'll bet they did.
So just a little background of things that happened in the history of this church. Well, back to my recollections, and I was talking about Darrell Gray. We got this building done, and I remember my grandfather, Bob Godey, had made a significant pledge. I think at that time he'd pledged $5,000, which was a lot of money, in 1950, but he could afford it. He was well off as a real estate broker and so forth. And he died on October the 9th, 1952, not long after this building, our current sanctuary, was opened. And I can remember very well being there at the funeral. In that, I was really torn up. I was a sophomore in high school, and he'd been my hunting buddy and my mentor and all of this. And my dad was postmaster, and he was tied up running the post office all the time. He couldn't get away like a self-employed person, so I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, Bob Goody. And we came here, got this building underway. I remember at the time that the front of the building and the chancel, all of that was entirely different than it is today. At that time, and you'll see pictures in our records of the choir being up in a loft behind the ministers. And they entered from stairways that came up from each side, and there were doors where they would come in from left and right. And the minister was sort of on a pedestal sort of thing in front, and the design was terrible. The minister was sort of up on a little pillar, you know, and he was away from the congregation. He couldn't interact with the congregation at all. And sort of a cold situation.
Yeah, poor design.
Yeah, poor design. But, you know, you got to live with a building like that before you know how to run it. So, at some later time, all of that was removed, our present configuration put in, and the choir put in behind the congregation in the choir loft just above the narthex. Well, originally we just had a little electric organ up there, that sort of thing. But now, of course, we have a beautiful pipe organ. And in addition to that, we have a grand piano, and we have very talented people running it. But I remember the principal of the high school was a man named E.H. West. Mr. West was a great big man, broad shoulders. He had served in the medical corps in World War I. And he was principal of New Braunfels High School when I was in school. And I remember very well, I can take you to the pew on the right-hand side, about 6 rows back from the front, which he nailed down every Sunday morning. And he was so tall he could flop his arm over like that he kind of hung on to it. Mr. West and I got up there when we opened that building, and they had all this woodwork that had been stained, but it needed to be waxed. So I worked with him, and we had these vibrators, polishers, and we put furniture wax all over that thing. We had, I don't know how many square feet that we had to polish, all that dark woodwork behind the minister and all of that. So I worked with him on that, and that was an interesting experience that I remember well. I don't remember anything particular that happened when we were at the Brontex, other than the seats were a lot more comfortable than we had in our church. I can tell you that. And the acoustics were excellent. In the old church, we had several different groups that came from time to time, and there was a group of 3 women, young women, singers that later became well known and appeared on television. And for the life of me now, I can't remember their name, but it was something Sisters, and they were good-looking gals, and they could sing like angels. And they were here for one Sunday, and of course I don't remember having more than the 11 o'clock service in those days. I don't.
We did not. That started with Harold Zirkle. We did 8:30 service shortly after he came.
Yeah, well, Harold had to have a little extra time to talk about Leviticus. Do you remember
right.
Leviticus?
Yes, his
Harold
puppet.
Zirkle had a hand puppet, and that he called Leviticus, and he'd talk to that hand puppet to entertain the kids.
Yeah.
It was a great ploy.
I believe he started the children's sermons. I do not remember them before Harold came anyway. I don't remember D. Ray Allison doing
I don't think
the
so either.
children's sermons. I think
I remember we had one preacher, and I can't tell you his name, but he was an older man, and he turned people off so bad because invariably he would start talking about his mother in his sermon, and he'd go to crying.
I don't remember.
Oh, this was a long time ago.
I wasn't here then, I don't think.
No, this was a long time ago. And I can remember my mother saying, I'm just not going back and listen to him cry over his mother. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now, in those days,
I don't blame her.
yeah,
That would not be.
she wasn't by herself.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In those days, Arthur W.C. Barth,
Yeah.
who was an insurance agent who lived right over here on Cross Street, just around the corner from where the Methodist parsonage had been, was the head usher. And he was the kind of guy that had gone around and he sold life insurance policies to people for their kids at a nickel a week or something. This was way back, and he made a good living doing that. Well, in my later years, he was a head usher, and my dad always ushered on communion Sundays, and so my dad suddenly died of a heart attack at age 64, and Mr. Barth got a hold of me and said, "Now you're going to take your daddy's place," just like that. "I'll see you here on Communion Sunday." Okay.
Wow. And Mr. Barth was he was a very dedicated person, and always out to welcome people.
There's certain things I can't say in this recording that I wouldn't want to get back to the family. I don't know whether his wife's gone, but he had the worst breath in the world. Bless his heart. And he'd get right up in your face when he was pinning on your usher badge. Little vignette things like that doesn't hurt anything.
Right.
We all have little halitosis from time to time. But anyway, he had a way about him though. He ran off some people from this church because he'd say, "Well, what are you doing here? I think this building's going to fall down." Instead of saying, "Well, welcome, I'm glad to see you again."
Oh, no.
That was his.
Christine Huntsman tells that said first Sunday she came, she definitely remembers him coming out to greet her, saying hello, and then she was the head nurse at the hospital, and she was with him when he died. And
oh, was that right?
That's correct. So she had real connection, she felt, to him.
Sure. Well, there've been, a number of ministers come and go since I was associated with this church, and I've been involved in a number of different committees. I can remember when I got back out of the military service, I'd been a legal officer in the Air Force. It was a JAG officer at Dover Air Force Base, Delaware, and my wife Jean and I were members in the Methodist Church there in Dover. And so naturally, when we got back here in May of '65, we moved our membership down to this church. And I don't remember who the minister was, but within a short period of time, the officers and administrative board changed. And you know, I was young and full of vinegar, and I was in law practice down here and starting out with Ray Bartram and J.C. Reagan and Tom Burris. And our office was on Castell Street. Anyway, they asked me to be chairman of the administrative board. Well, being a graduate of Texas A&M and the Corps of Cadets and having been an officer in the Air Force, I was full of a lot of vinegar. And I was ready to really take hold of this job that I'd been asked to do and do what I could to help with the church. Well, so I sort of did that. And it wasn't long before that preacher let me know this was his church. And he wanted me to butt out of his business. And he would run it. And I said, okay. And at that time they changed I had signed up for a year. And before I got started, they changed the church year. So all of a sudden, I had it for 18 months. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll run your little sewing circle down here that's here for no other reason than to amen what you've put in, but don't ask me to do it again. And that's the way it went down. And I've been on the administrative board again. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that was an interesting experience because it really it aggravated me because I was really set to, and I wasn't butting in on his business.
Well, and the way our system is set up, the minister is not supposed to run everything. It's supposed to be.
I understood that, and of course I've been chairman twice of the Pastor Parish Relations Committee, and unfortunately on both of those occasions, not through my doing, but just overall necessity, we had two ministers that we needed to dismiss, associate pastors, that just didn't work out. They'll remain unnamed, but they just didn't work out. And after a short period of time, it just happened.
That's a difficult committee to serve on.
It is, and you're the buffer between the congregation and the ministers. And you know, in the Bar Association we have a bench bar committee that when the judge needs calling down, the lawyers get together and send an emissary to talk to him and say, well, we'd rather you not do certain things, mm-hmm. You know, or could you do them some other way? Mm-hmm. And I've been in that position too. So anyway, this Methodist Church, of course, has been involved with the founding of other Methodist churches around here, haven't we, Margaret? Yeah. Didn't we have something to do with the founding of the Canyon Lake Church?
Well, E.E. Reeves was one of the first ministers out there, and he was at this church. Now, whether we had anything to do with the founding of that, I know that we bought the land for Green, but I didn't know anything about Canyon Lake other than perhaps support of some kind.
Well, I don't know, and I was thinking about the one at Bulverde, but I may be wrong. But the one at Green, definitely.
Yeah, that's the daughter church.
That one we gave birth to, and I'm proud to say it's alive and well.
Very well.
We put together some money here in this church, and we were going to borrow a sizable amount of money from the Methodist Foundation to buy this land on the corner of Highway 306 mm-hmm. and Hunter Road, where Green United Methodist Church is now. And Reverend Lowry was here at that time, and he was a moving force behind all of that. And so several of us put together some significant money. and made the down payment with money borrowed from the foundation. Well, in no time at all, it became evident because of the development out there on 306 that this was valuable real estate. And we wanted the church away from 306, which had so much traffic going from Highway 35 up to Canyon Lake, that we did not want any driveway opening onto that major highway. So we moved to the old road behind, where it's sort of out of the main traffic, but you can see it. Well, in no time we sold the corner for big bucks on the 306 and East Common Street. Then we sold another lot or two, and I think we still have one. I'm not sure.
I believe we do, because I think I heard Jason saying they thought they had it sold and then something went through, so I think we do still have one.
It's a good investment. It's just going to appreciate in value. My son David Pfeuffer is a lawyer here in New Braunfels, and he and I did all the legal work for, and didn't charge anything for it, but we did all the legal work in acquiring the property and getting all those pieces sold.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we borrow about $1 million? I mean, the asking price out there was about $1 million of debt that we took on, something like that, and it was all paid off way before I thought it would ever be.
We got it paid off in no time, and so we were home free because that land had appreciated along the highway once we broke it up into smaller parcels. Well, we've been going about 30 minutes, and
she'll be right back. She has to go see something. So
all right. Well, I didn't know whether she needed to take a break.
No, she just said she'll leave it all running. She'll go.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think where we ought to go from here, Margaret. Gail said she was going to ask me questions. But she's been awfully quiet because I'm doing all the talking.
Well, the Green United Methodist Church has been marvelous as far as I'm concerned, what they did, but this church sponsored, and it was when Reverend Lowry was here that we started thinking about that. It took a while, and Karen Horan's the one they brought in to work with this, because she had done this in McKinney, Texas, I believe.
I don't know. She was our associate minister here.
She was our associate minister, and they brought her in specifically for that, because I was on PPR at that time.
Yeah.
And she came in specifically for that and went. She had helped with one in McKinney, Texas, that had been in the same kind of a growth pattern that New Braunfels has been in, this overwhelming growth.
Sure.
And that's why, and I know they met in schools for at least 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, and we paid their salary. We paid Karen's salary for 1 year, maybe helped the next, and she said, after that I have to make it on my own or we give it up. And she's made it on her own. I mean, she made it then on her own and got the building started and paid for.
Very active.
Paid for, but very active church.
Very active congregation. They have rummage sales and I don't know what all kinds of things.
And the KP Polk that Jerry Stringer was talking about, I believe is an assistant minister out there now.
Don't know him.
Okay, he played in, if you ever went to middle service here, he was the drummer. And was active in the band here. He's out there now, and I'm sure that Karen told me that KP's now maybe taking some training. I'm sure he's taking training, and he's an assistant pastor and works one of those.
You're talking about our contemporary service.
I'm talking about
I call it our rock and roll service. I don't ever go.
Calvin calls it rock and roll. I liked it. I enjoyed it very much.
Well, then that's when you ought to go.
But I taught Sunday school at that time and could seldom ever go.
Sure.
So.
Well, if I can't get up and going at 8:30, I go at 11.
Yeah.
And that's always 11 o'clock's always been my time. But if I'm up and doing, I thought it was interesting that we had such a big crowd at 8 a.m. Easter service.
We had a good crowd.
I have friends that are in the First Protestant Church at the 8 a.m. service every Sunday, and they drive from long distances, halfway to San Antonio. One guy that I hunt with in South Texas, Jim Heitkamp. Anyway, I think that at this point I'm going to take a break, and then we can pool our thoughts and see whether there's anything else that we would want to say on camera. Do we need for Amber to come back and?
We need for her to come, but we can step out. I'm assuming this will just keep running.
It will, and she can
She
just
can
delete it
adjust.
from where we quit.
She can adjust what she wants.
Sure.
Um,
Well, we've got about 30 minutes.
you know, anything else that you want to continue with?
Well, I don't
as
want to
far
talk
as-
about anything that's not relevant.
Well, I think nearly everything you said has been relevant so far.
Yeah,
as
but
far
I'm
as
trying
church
to think
history.
of things that, you know.
You were talking about the Carbach settlement and the out there. I would like to. Was that out of 306 out where the that subdivision is now? Is that where that building was?
It's right where Reverend Lowry lives right now. That was the
Okay.
David Carbach farm.
That's where the building was that had the open out.
That's where I understand that it was.
Okay.
Now, one of the things you had mentioned to me in preparation for this thing, you wanted to know what happened to the stained glass windows in the old church. And that has been a thorn in my side for a long time. Of course, we have the one that is hanging in the hall in a frame down here in just outside the church.
The one that's has Carbach.
Yes, that was
okay.
one of them. But there were a number of others. And my investigation, I was trying to get them and have them restored, have them re-leaded or whatever. And I was told that they had stored all those things under the church, back under where that old choir loft was, and that they were not stained glass, they were painted glass. So they really weren't worth anything in the sense, now to me, historically they'd be worth a lot for the church. And whoever it was, I was talking to one of the ministers, or this has been years ago when I was digging into this, and they didn't know what happened to them. Whether, for all I know, they're still there.
I have no idea.
But I don't know how you'd get back on it. There had to be some kind of storage area under that choir loft, behind the pulpit and all of there.
Pulpit, yeah.
But there's all sorts of offices back there for the ministers.
Now, when we did that renovation, that was all made into offices back there for ministers, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Was that when we built Wesley Hall?
Well, that was going on. We moved here in '69. I think Harold Circle, when Mark got married the first time, that was, he couldn't get married here because this church was being renovated at that time, and that's when Harold Circle was here, and I think that's when a lot of the construction you were talking about on the front happened. When a lot of that stuff was torn down, it was made more, a little more friendly so that the pastor could interact more with the people and so forth.
Yes.
And that organ that used to be up there, all that was taken down, but I think that would have been about 1990. And I know that we couldn't have the wedding here because we were at St. John's Episcopal.
Something crossed my mind just then when we were talking about the building and being renovated and so forth. I'm trying to get it back, but
and I'm wondering if that's when Wesley Hall was built also.
And of course Wesley Hall has been changed too.
Well, it's been changed, right. A lot of that has been changed.
At one time we had a big stage and all on one end, and now that's all been torn out.
Right.
And,
it's just storage down there now. But the offices, pastors' offices and so forth, were all added in, I think at the same time that renovation was done. I think that all that offices and where the library was and all that were all added.
Yes, where we have our meeting room now in the morning, where you can go in and have coffee and donuts and that sort of thing.
A welcome center, right?
A welcome center. That was a library that was given by Dr. and Mrs. Nelson Kaler.
Okay.
And Nelson was an orthodontist here in New Braunfels, and has passed away since then. But his wife's still in town. They went to a more conservative church, but they had spent a lot of money on setting up this library and building shelves, and it was a first-class operation.
Nice.
And then it was filled with books that they bought and religious books that people had donated from the congregation. But it wasn't used a whole lot.
No, it was not used as much as would have been good, and that storage right behind there where the nurse's office is now was what was the archives room, and that's why things were moved from here.
Here.
All right, now, Gail's just given me some information, and one of the things that we've got here that people need to know about is something that was published in 1984, and it's a brief history of our church and talks about a lot of the different things that I have mentioned. And over in Comaltown on Union Street, on the corner of Common, there's a huge oak tree in the front yard of a fast food chain. What's the name of that place over there? They sell gasoline and
Sack and Pack.
it's a Sack and Pack location. But that's where this old church building was located. Now that's before my time. But that big oak tree is still there, and you can find pictures of the old oak tree. And then there's a picture here of the Carbach Memorial Methodist Church with the parsonage just to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says our church today, and the present sanctuary was opened May 11th, 1952. And I told you my grandfather died in October the same year.
Mm-hmm.
And the parsonage was built over at 166 South Clemens, which is the one I was talking about. And now we have a parsonage on Twin Oaks up off of Highway 46. Anyway, we had a 4-phase building program, it says. Phase 1 was the remodeling of the sanctuary in 1980. Phase 2 was the remodeling of Wesley Hall. Phase 3, the remodeling of the Carbach adult building, which is over to the left of the sanctuary when you look at it from San Antonio Street. And Phase 4 was the construction of an administrative building, and we moved into the remodeled sanctuary in March of 1982. So
That's when the car loft, I guess, was changed.
yeah. You know, when I was in law school at the University of Texas Law School in Austin between 59 and 62, I had a criminal law professor named Stumberg, who was a dried up little old man about this tall, and he always talked like he was an alcoholic, but he really wasn't. He was an excellent professor, and he really knew his business, and he taught criminal law and he taught comparative law. But he was a student in Austin during the Prohibition, and he said, you know, we used to go down to New Braunfels, and we'd drive around. We got to this service station not too far west of the plaza, and we went in there and said, where can we buy some beer? The guy said, come out here, I'll show you. He said, we went out to the curb, and he says, you see that building over there? That's the Methodist church. I said, see that building over yonder? That's the Baptist church. He said, anywhere else in town you can buy beer. So we were even making headlines in those days.
But you couldn't buy the beer at the Methodist Church or the Baptist Church.
That's the only place in town, according to him.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, he got a lot of laughs telling that kind of story. But in any event, well, I'm about out of things to talk about. Amber will be back in a minute, and we can shut the thing down and see whether there's something else that we want to talk about. But as I go through here and look at these pictures, my heavens.
Let's see, we need to add to it. That's been Is that the 2003 history?
No, I don't think so.
This says 1984.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
just
this is the bullet, just a
church directory.
church directory.
Church
Yeah.
directory, yes.
Well, see,
But-
we've got that history that was,
That was good thinking, Gail, that you had that
that
in
we
here.
need to bring
And
back.
Tinsley Ellis, pictures of Tinsley Ellis, Colonel Tinsley Ellis in here.
Yeah.
My goodness, he was here every day that the sun would shine, and even then he would be here volunteering his time, and he was really the church administrator
He was
without
boss.
being paid a nickel.
I've been paid a nickel. I remember that Harold Zirkle said, I used to go in and take Tinsley's pulse every morning just to be sure he was still
Well, he did so much
functioning. He
work.
did so much.
And he was a retired colonel, and another good Aggie, by the way. And he had retired as a full colonel. And how well I remember when we laid him out in his casket in his full dress uniform.
Well, he was a very valuable part of this church for
Oh.
many, many years.
And
It was 1987 that the Wesley Hall was refurbished or
1987.
remodeled, and the gym was put in, yeah. And it looks like that was under Zirkle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here's a picture of Dr. Nelson Kaler cooking pancakes at the Methodist Men's Pancake Supper that we used to have all the time. We made a lot of money doing that.
I do remember you talking about Nelson Kaler. He and Genevieve gave the first church van we ever had here.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They gave that van because my Sunday school class was transported in that van for years. The Sunshine class was transported in that van
Sure.
for a good many years then.
Well, they did a lot of great work while they were
They did a lot of good
here.
things there, and I had nearly all their kids in Sunday school classes too, because I was teaching primary at that
Yes,
time.
they had several, as I recall. Well, Amber, I think we're probably out of gas.
Okay.
And I think I can go through this book and start looking at pictures and names, and I can talk about all kinds of folks that I run into here.
Right.
And Bobby Allen, as a young woman, my goodness.
Mhm. Yeah, Bobby.
She
was-
and Jimmy were here every Sunday, and just on and on and on. But those are good prompts. I think that's probably enough.
All right.
All right.